Welcome back to Cape Ann today, folks. Heather and I are joined by Peter Phippen. He's been on the show before. It's good to catch up with him. Peter is the coastal coordinator for the Mass Bays program and the MVPC. I don't even know, Peter. It's you got a lot going
Merrimack
on.
Valley Planning Commission,
Yeah,
which is a
Amazing.
regional planning agency that doesn't include Essex, but it includes Rowley and the lower Merrimack River communities. And I'm housed out of their office as my job for the Mass Bays program, which is a state program in my region, is the Great Marsh.
Right. Yeah, and that's what we spoke about last time. You're also heavily involved with Essex as a municipality and what's going on there too. And there's a lot of things happening there. So we wanted to have this conversation for a while. So we're glad we can spend some time with you today.
Great.
So off the top, what is the latest with the Great Marsh and the green crab epidemic? That's where we left off last time around.
Yes, well, as you saw, I think at our recent annual town meeting, we put in for another $5,000 in match funding for this year's green crab. Over the last, I don't know, half dozen years or so, we've been getting funding thanks to Senator Tarr and now ex-rep Brad Hill for green crab trapping. And we anticipate we'll get it this year as well. Now, Anne Margaret Ferrante has been spearheading that effort now that Brad is gone. But and we did as well during special town meeting. We got, I think it was $10,000 in green crab funding. But because it was so late in the season, it was a November meeting. The season ends in December, at the end of December. They didn't get to expend it all. That's why we only went for 5,000 this year. We typically, from the state, us, Gloucester, Ipswich, and Rowley, or Gloucester, Ipswich, and Newbury. Rowley, for whatever reason, hasn't been participating. Get $10,000 a year to manage green crabs through trapping. And so that program has been going well. Trapping has been very successful, although this last year we had heard from some of the clammers, and it's generally the clammers that do the trapping. What happens is the state gives funding to each of the towns, and then the town hires whoever wants to go out and trap, and generally it's the clammers because they're out there, they know what they're doing, to trap them and get them out of the system. And they can do whatever they want with them. They can compost them, they can sell them, whatever they want to do just to make sure they're out of there. But what we heard was that the green crabs were becoming more prolific this year from the trappers. And so we decided to throw in some traps. As you know, I probably mentioned it before, we had a major trapping program for about 5 years where we were monitoring, because at that time, and probably still to this day, nobody really knows a whole lot about the green crab and its life cycle and what it does and why it does it and all that sort of stuff. And so we wanted to just check in and see where things are at. And it seems as though last year was a pretty big year for the green crab again. I don't know how that fits in with the clam seed cycle. I haven't been hearing a lot from the clammers, so it's probably not like it was in 2015 or whenever it was that they really were out of control and eating all the seed clams on the flats, but they are up there in numbers. I've been trying to get out this spring to trap again and see where things are at, but as we just discussed, it's been so windy that we haven't been able to do that. We need to get at least a couple of days in a row, a bunch of times, because you put them out one day, 24-hour soak, and you pick them up the next day, and then you count and sex them and all that kind of stuff. We haven't been able to do that because the weather's been so lousy. But we'll get to it. We're talking about maybe doing it this week, maybe next week, I don't know, with a lot of other things coming up as well.
What kind of numbers, Peter, just on average in the last 5 years, are these trappers seeing? Like when they pull up a trap, which looks like basically a lobster trap, right?
Yeah, it's a little bit smaller, and it's got just one opening. You know, I don't know, you know, they all use different things. Typically, they're the smaller style traps. A small trap will hold around 400 to 500 crabs.
Mhm.
And I don't know how long they usually leave them down. We do ours for 24 hours. And last late summer, I guess it was fall, whenever it was that we did the monitoring, we were pulling up full traps in 24 hours in the locations that we put them. The trappers are putting them in places typically where they know there are going to be a lot of crabs because they get paid by the pound, so they want to have full traps if they can. So generally in the Thelweg of the channel, the deepest part of the channel, they'll put their traps, and I don't know how long they leave them. Lately, it's been Essex Shellfish that's been doing the trapping with the state and town money. But they've been pretty full. Most of the traps have been pretty full, as best I know, and throughout the Great Marsh and Newbury as well, and in Ipswich.
Well, there've been all kinds of programs established, including eating green crabs, eating soft shell versions of green crabs, and eating the roe, which are the eggs of green crabs, right?
Yep.
Is trapping still the most efficacious, basically, in getting rid of these crabs?
Yes, because I mean, we worked for a number of years trying to make green crab as a culinary favorite. It never caught on, and even if it did, it really would be more of an awareness type thing than, you know, to reduce the numbers, because, you know, how many soft shell crabs are you going to get rid of? I mean,
Right.
how many, you know, or she crab soup with you know, the roe. So there's still, you know, green crab, I think it's greencrab.org still is pushing the green crab and using it, and other shellfish like that. But since our person who is specializing in green crab food shifted over last year or the year before into fertilizer, trying to use the green crab, the whole green crab, for fertilizer. And he was somewhat successful. He put it out, but it's not been, I don't know, it just hasn't gone anywhere. We found some money for him to do a proof of concept, and I think he's just sort of getting out of that whole, he's getting a little frustrated with the whole operation of green crab. But we do have a group that meets monthly with you know, a couple of, you know, heavyweights in the green crab industry, if you want to call it that, but also with Neptune's Harvest. We've got them interested in possibly the fertilizer, just, you know, to talk about possibilities in the green crab and that sort of thing. So there's still a group that's keeping on top of it.
And Peter, for those late to the game, can you just sort of punctuate once again why green crabs are such a threat locally?
Well, because they eat pretty much everything in their wake that they can eat, as far as shellfish goes. I mean, they're probably the reason there are no real mussel beds left. I mean, there are a couple, but they're only in locations where green crab can't get to them, such as out at Canomo Point on the rocks there, where the current is fast and the green crab can't get at them. They'll eat the small, the seed mussel, the seed clams, and I don't know, they eat, you know, like, you know, some phenomenal number of times their weight in clams per day. And there's, you know, each green crab lays about 180,000 eggs a year. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of them out there.
They're pretty industrious, yeah.
Yes, they're a typical invasive species, you know, that takes advantage of the weakness of others and takes over, you know.
And as you know, my green crab history is a little bit weak, but as I recall, they are on every continent on Earth. Is that right?
I believe they are, except for like Antarctica, something like that. Yeah, they're everywhere.
Yeah, and they started out in Europe, right? And they just spread across the earth.
Yeah, yeah, yep.
It's
So
quite a
in,
story.
in Italy, they're actually, there's a whole food industry around soft shell green crabs. And we had a guy who does it over there come over and try to help us to identify the tendencies of the green crab shell as it's getting close to molting and all that sort of stuff. And, it's just, they're just a different enough, variation of the species that, it didn't work. We couldn't tell.
Yeah,
So,
that's
but they're very successful. They can pick them out a month before they're going to molt, and they put them in a certain, tank. And then when they're 2 weeks out, another one. When they're 3 days out, another one, and so on and so forth. So they've got it down to a science, and they get, $25 a plate, in a nice restaurant over there.
yeah.
So does the effort here, does it feel like just a finger in the dike, or do you feel like there's progress being made?
I think there is really progress being made, especially in seasons when, the conditions aren't as great for a green crab. When it's like a warmer winter, or certain conditions that they're not multiplying as rapidly as they would. When the conditions are perfect for them, they're going to be all over the place no matter what we do. But when they're not so great, I think we're handling them pretty well. I think the trapping has been fairly successful, at least around the clam flats. I mean, and that's where the clammers are trapping them for the most part.
Right. Nice. Okay, so do you want to turn the page and talk sort of all things Essex? As we're having this interview, I think the town election is occurring, right?
Yes.
Or it's like, so what are sort of the things on the the hot button items that you're dealing with this in 2022?
Well, as you know, the school budget's a big budget, and we're looking at a potential override for next year. So that will always be fun, trying to figure out how to do that. I mean, there's no fault of anybody's. There's so many mandated requirements that the school system has to go through that costs a lot of money, that there's very little excess for anything. So as those state and federal mandates continue, we've got to meet them, and we still want to try to provide as best a school experience as we can, and it costs money.
Mm-hmm.
It's notable that a number of people are already talking about this override next year. I mean, usually we start hearing about a school override, maybe 6 months out, but it's really apparent that the town is concerned. Can you identify any sort of conversations you're planning on having, any sort of campaign, any sort of way to reach out to the public to talk about this?
I'm not as close to it. We have one of the selectmen sits on there's a group of administrators and school committee members in town, Manchester people, that meet, I think it's every couple of weeks, to talk about the ins and outs of the school. That's Guy Bradford. He would know better. And then, of course, the school committee itself has a lot to say with how things go as well.
Right.
And has the needle moved at all as far as the housing market in Essex? So there's a real dearth of available housing.
Not really. I mean, you saw that we passed the housing, what was it? You probably know better than I do.
Affordable housing
trust.
The Affordable Housing Trust, yeah. And that really just allows us to take in funds from, the town as well as non-town entities and put a committee together to try to figure out how to address affordable housing in the town, and to actually, I don't think that there would ever be enough money in the fund to purchase property, but to go in with a state grant or federal grant or some other entity to try to purchase affordable housing.
And lastly, I want to ask, it's been about a year or so since the new, the police and fire building opened up. How has that transition been?
Great,
Yep.
great. Everybody loves it. I mean, there's been a few bugs here and there, but nothing significant, and no complaints. I think it's as advertised. The building is fulfilling the needs and of all the employees in it. I think it's been great. And it looks I really like how it looks. I mean, you look at some of the other stock public safety buildings around the North Shore, they look like public safety buildings around the North Shore. And this looks, there's some intrigue to it.
That's a nice one.
Well,
Anything else, Heather?
Well, there's always the Causeway. We can
Yeah.
always ask you about what's happening.
Oh, yeah, and the
on there.
bridge. Yeah.
Yeah, the bridge. The
Yeah,
traffic.
they're right now relocating utilities, and that's going to go on probably for another couple of weeks. By the end of the month, we'll probably be onto the temporary bridge. My regret is that we couldn't convince MassDOT to raise the bridge at all. It's going to be raised about an inch. And part of the reason why that bridge failed was because of sea level rise and the water's getting up underneath, freezing and cracking the bridge. So it seems like it would be, would have been a good move to raise it a little bit more. But then, you have the issues of the approaches to the bridge, because those are required a certain way. Now you've got, it's way too high as you're coming down on the Causeway side of the bridge, and you can't get into the businesses and such. So there's a whole lot of issues there, and that's why it's extremely important that we at least have access within town, across town. And we've been working on raising the far end of Apple Street, where that overtopped in the 2018 storms and flooded out that roadway. So there was no way to get across town other than to go, really down to 128 and around for emergency vehicles and DPW and such. And so it's important that we get that road raised. And as I said, we're in the process. We've gotten a lot of state grants to continue on with that work, and we're doing that.
Gotcha.
So I do have a question about that, Peter. I understand there's a conversation at town meeting about the road not actually being raised, but more being widened, and there was concern about that.
No, I mean, the road is not being widened, but in order to raise the road, you have to have a certain slope on the side of it, unless you want to put in a wall, and I don't think that's what is anticipated here. So you have to widen out another, I don't know, few feet into the marsh, and not so much on the other side, but into the marsh side. So we're not widening the road, you're widening the superstructure that holds the road up, which is the dirt berm that's going to be underneath the roadway.
Right.
And it's only for 100 yards maybe of the road.
And this is where Apple Street meets, is it School Street? Southern Avenue. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Within, tens of feet from Southern Ave.
Yeah. I mean, charm is just such a great commodity in that part of the world. So there's always concern when you see a bulldozer there.
Yeah. I mean, it would make no sense to widen it too much there anyway, though. I mean, the whole road is narrow. I mean, if we're going to widen the road, we should widen the road, and that's probably not going to happen.
Right.
Even once we lose the Causeway, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the options are.
Wait, that sounded like, you mean when we lose the Causeway because from rising sea levels?
Yeah, eventually that's going to happen. I mean, it might not be for 100 years, but eventually the business owners will get sick of rebuilding their properties as they flood out. And they'll move away, and then you'll have the Causeway there, and that will be underwater fairly frequently, maybe MassDOT will abandon it. I don't know. But you know, we're talking 100 years from now, or maybe even more.
Right. Well, that's even more apocalyptic than the green crabs.
Yes, it is.
Essex is under siege, folks.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, that's what happens when you're a coastal community, right? You get
Yeah.
climate change upon us. You know, there's a lot of things that need to consider, and that's one of the reasons why we opted for establishing a stabilization fund for climate change projects, so that we have match funding to be able to do this when state grants come along. We don't have to go to town meeting every time and say we need 50,000 to match this and 75,000 to match that. We wanted to establish a stabilization fund so we have that funding in place and we don't miss out on any grants
Oh, that's
related
great.
to climate change. Yeah.
So Gloucester is not hiring a sustainability, well, they are hiring a sustainability director. I apologize for saying that. So is this basically Essex, your effort to just stay on top of this whole issue and be aware?
Well, it's a stabilization fund. So that fund is just money that we can use for matching state grants and federal grants that come along. So yeah, I mean, you know, like we also at town meeting last week voted to match the Apple Street project, because we were putting in a grant, I think, went in last week for you know, design and engineering and permitting or whatever, the next phase of that project. And we needed $85,000 in match, so we went to town meeting for it. But the stabilization fund is an effort to, you know, build up a kitty before we actually need it, and then we can do it, because the timing worked out for this particular project. The town meeting was just before it, but if it hadn't been, you know, and we wanted to apply for a grant in, you know, August, and we needed some funds, you know, what do? Have a special town meeting, or, you know, I mean, so that's what this is all about.
I guess my point is, all of these towns and municipalities are going to need to have some forethought around sustainability and, you know, facing the issues of climate change. That's
and most of them are, at least in the Great Marsh communities, most of them are well aware of what's going on. They've all done planning, looking at what some of their vulnerable infrastructure is and what needs to be done to protect it. And, you know, it's hard to get the funding to do stuff that may, in some people's mind, or may not happen, or at least won't happen for a long time when you've got an override for the schools in the works, you know. So those are the competition. It's what's right in front of your nose, or something that may be down the line, you know, and so it makes it hard.
Well, it's always fun catching up with you, Peter. We really enjoy the conversation, and we're hoping to take Cape Ann today back on the road again soon. We're due to visit Essex, and now I'm thinking we better get out there sooner than later.
Yeah, right. Yeah, before the Causeway washes away.
Yeah, we'll bring our water wings and do something down the Causeway this spring. Hey, thanks for your time. We'll catch up with you soon, Peter.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Interested in a sponsorship? Email sponsor@1623studios.org to learn more.